Nancy adjusted the files neatly stacked on the front passenger seat of her small sedan. It was early morning as she hummed softly to herself, trying to calm her nerves. Her boss, the mayor, had an important meeting, and she needed to deliver these files without delay. As she approached the notorious stretch of road, a man stood by the side, hitchhiking. He waved his hand enthusiastically, a duffel bag hung over his shoulder. Nancy hesitated. Everyone in the area knew of the robber who preyed on lone drivers here. Yet, the man looked harmless in his rugged jeans and faded t-shirt. With a sigh, Nancy rolled down her window slightly. "Where to?" she asked cautiously. "Just up ahead, ma'am," the man said, flashing a tired smile. "The files are taking up space." "You'll have to sit in the back," she said. The man nodded, opening the rear door and settling in. The drive was quiet at first. Nancy glanced occasionally in the rearview mirror, her unease growing as the man scanned the surroundings. About 10 minutes into the drive, the man suddenly leaned forward, pressing something cold and metallic against her neck. "Take the next left," he said, his voice now menacing. Nancy froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She risked a glance in the mirror and saw the gun in his hand, flashing threateningly. "Please, I don't have much money," she stammered. "Just do as I say," he barked, shoving the gun harder against her neck. With trembling hands, Nancy obeyed, turning onto a narrow dirt path that twisted into a dense forest. The car jolted over rocks and potholes until they reached a clearing. It was desolate except for an old, abandoned shed and 2 rusting cars parked haphazardly. "Get out," the man ordered. Nancy stepped out slowly, her legs shaking. Her hand instinctively went to her swollen belly as she tried to steady herself. "Stand over there," he pointed toward the shed. Nancy complied, tears streaming down her face. She thought of her unborn child, a boy she had already named Liam. She couldn't let this be the end. The man rummaged through her car, pulling out her purse and sifting through it. He grunted in dissatisfaction. "Where's the real money?" he snapped. I don't carry much cash," Nancy stuttered. "Please, take whatever you want. Just let me go." But he wasn't listening. He pulled out a pair of cable ties from his bag and walked toward her. "Hands behind your back," he growled. Nancy hesitated, her breath coming in short gasps. That's when it happened. His eyes fell on her belly. "Wait, are you pregnant?" Nancy nodded, her hands instinctively cradling her pregnant stomach. The man took a step back, lowering the gun slightly. His hardened expression faltered as he stared at her. "How far along are you?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. 9 months, Nancy said, tears still streaming. "Please don't hurt me. I'm due any day now." The man ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. He paced back and forth, muttering to himself. "This wasn't part of the plan," he murmured. Nancy saw her chance. "Please, think about your mother," she said, her voice trembling. "Would she want you to harm a pregnant woman? This baby is innocent. He's done nothing wrong." Her words seemed to hit a nerve. The man froze, his face clouded with a mix of emotions, guilt, anger, and something else Nancy couldn't quite place. "Shut up," he snapped, but his voice lacked the venom it had earlier. The man turned away from her, his shoulders slumping. For a moment he seemed lost in thought. "My mom," he muttered, more to himself than to Nancy. "She died giving birth to me." Nancy's heart ached at the confession. She decided to press further, despite the risk. "She wouldn't want this for you," Nancy said gently. "You're better than this. Let me go, and I promise I won't say anything to anyone." He looked at her, his eyes filled with turmoil. "I didn't ask for this life," he said bitterly. "People like you, safe, comfortable, you don't know what it's like to be desperate." "I know more than you think," Nancy said, her voice firm despite her fear. "I grew up in poverty too. But this isn't the way to fix it." The man seemed to wrestle with himself, his hands trembling as he held the gun. Finally, he threw it to the ground with a frustrated yell. "Get in the car," he barked. Nancy hesitated. "Go," he shouted, but his tone was different now, urgent, almost protective. She climbed back into the driver's seat, her hands still shaking. The man got in the back again, slamming the door shut. "Drive," he ordered. "Where?" "Back to the main road." As they drove, the man's demeanor shifted. He asked about her job, her baby, and even her dreams for the future. "Why do you care?" Nancy asked cautiously. He didn't answer immediately. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Because you remind me of what I could have had if things were different." Nancy's heart softened slightly, though she remained wary. "You can still change," she said. "It's not too late." He let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know the things I've done." "Maybe not," Nancy admitted. "But this, letting me go, it's a start." As they approached the main road, Nancy spotted flashing lights in the distance, police cars. She panicked. "They're looking for you," she said. The man cursed under his breath. "Stop the car." "What? Why?" "Just do it." Nancy pulled over, her heart racing. The man leaned forward, reaching into the duffel bag. Nancy braced herself, fearing the worst. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a stack of cash and handed it to her. "Take this," he said. I can't." "Take it," he insisted. "Use it for the baby." Before she could respond, he opened the door and bolted into the forest, disappearing among the trees. The police arrived moments later. They surrounded Nancy's car, guns drawn, but she quickly explained what had happened. "He ran that way," she said, pointing toward the forest. The officers chased after him, but Nancy doubted they'd find him. Later, as she sat in her car, clutching the stack of cash, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. The man had terrorized her, but in the end, he had shown a sliver of humanity, a spark of redemption. A week later, Nancy gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Liam, just as she'd planned. Every now and then, she thought about the man who had spared her life and helped her when she least expected it. She wondered if he'd found a way to turn his life around or if he was still out there, haunted by his past. Whatever the case, Nancy knew one thing for certain. Her son's life was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for light to break through. The robber, who called himself Zondi to those who knew him, ran through the dense forest, his heart pounding as heavily as his boots against the soft earth. The flashing police lights had been a stark reminder that his days of escaping justice were numbered. But something had shifted in him since his encounter with Nancy. Her trembling voice and the sight of her swollen belly haunted him. The realization that he had pointed a gun at a pregnant woman, a life within a life, troubled his conscience like a festering wound. He had thrown her a lifeline at the last moment, leaving her unharmed and giving her some of the money he had stolen. Yet, as Zondi emerged from the forest onto an unfamiliar dirt road, he couldn't help but ask himself, was that enough to make up for the things I've done? Back in the safety of her home, Nancy cradled baby Liam in her arms. The newborn had been a source of joy and hope, a light in her darkest moment. Yet, she couldn't shake the memory of Zondi's trembling hands and the conflicted look in his eyes as he fled. She hadn't told the police everything. She had kept the stack of cash he'd given her, hidden in a shoebox under her bed. Nancy knew it was blood money, but she also knew it could change her and Liam's life for the better. Still, part of her felt guilty. Should she have turned over the cash to the authorities? Should she have revealed the softer side of the man who had terrorized her? She shook her head, focusing on the here and now. Liam needed her to be strong, and she had a life to rebuild. Months passed. Zondi lived on the run, drifting from one small town to the next. He avoided crowded places, kept his head down, and worked odd jobs under fake names. One day, while working as a laborer at a construction site, he overheard a conversation between two men. "Did you hear about that woman who works at the mayor's office? The one who had a baby recently? Yeah, she was robbed a while back, right? Poor thing." Zondi's ears picked up. "She's tough though. They say she's organizing some big charity event for single mothers. Even used some of her own money to kickstart it." Her own money? On a secretary's salary? That's impressive. Zondi's heart sank. The money he'd given her, it was being used to help others. Guilt and admiration twisted inside him. That night, Zondi made a decision. The mayor's office buzzed with activity. Nancy stood near the entrance, welcoming attendees to the charity event she had poured her heart into. The hall was filled with single mothers and their children, volunteers bustling around with plates of food and donated supplies. Unknown to her, Zondi stood outside, watching from the shadows. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face and a jacket that hid his wiry frame. He didn't know why he had come. Maybe to see if she was okay. Maybe to reassure himself that his small act of mercy had meant something. But as he watched Nancy laugh with a group of mothers, holding Liam in her arms, he felt an overwhelming wave of regret. He had taken so much from others, but she had taken what little he had given and turned it into hope. As the event wound down, Nancy stepped outside to get some air. Zondi, caught off guard, turned to leave, but a small cry stopped him. It was Liam. Nancy looked around, her eyes landing on the figure lurking in the shadows. Her heart raced, but something about the way he stood, hesitant, almost vulnerable, made her pause. "Zondi," she said softly, recognizing him immediately. He stiffened. You remembered my face?" Nancy nodded, clutching Liam closer. "It's hard to forget someone who spared your life." Zondi looked down, shame flooding his features. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said quickly. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." Nancy studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she said, "You can come closer." But only for a minute. Zondi hesitated, then stepped into the dim light. Nancy didn't know what to expect as Zondi approached. Up close, he looked different, skinny, tired, and older than she remembered. "You've changed," she said. "So have you," he replied, his eyes flicking to Liam. They stood in awkward silence until Zondi spoke again. "I'm sorry for what I did. To you and to everyone else. I was desperate." Nancy searched his face for sincerity and found it in his haunted eyes. "You've been running ever since, haven't you?" He nodded. "You can't keep living like this, Zondi. It'll catch up to you." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what choice do I have? People like me, we don't get second chances." Nancy looked at Liam, then back at Zondi. "Maybe you do. But you have to want it." Zondi didn't stay long. Before he left, Nancy handed him something, a flyer for a community rehabilitation program. "This could help you," she said. He stared at the paper, his hands trembling. "Why would you help me after everything I've done?" "Because everyone deserves a chance to change," she said simply. "Even you." Zondi swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you." As he disappeared into the night, Nancy watched him go, hope mixing with uncertainty. Weeks later, Zondi, clutching the flyer Nancy had given him, took a deep breath and stepped inside the rehabilitation center. Months turned into years. Zondi rebuilt his life, working as a counselor for at-risk youth. He used his story as a cautionary tale, urging others to choose a better path before it was too late. One day, as he prepared for a community event, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Nancy stood there, holding Liam's hand. The boy, now a toddler, looked up at him with curious eyes. "Hello, Zondi," Nancy said, smiling. He swallowed the lump in his throat, tears threatening to spill. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For what? For giving me a second chance?" Nancy simply nodded. As Liam tugged at her hand, Zondi watched them walk away, his heart lighter than it had been in years. What happens next? Will Zondi's new life inspire others to change? Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it to your friends, and stay tuned for more African moral tales.